Okay, so we're going to chat today about some really interesting work that you're doing, it's in a way a critical commentary around this video game Bioshock, but it's much more than that. So this piece is Neo-Libertarian Rapture, Technofascism and the Politics of Bioshock. So taking this game Bioshock, which is set in the future, in the tradition of science fiction utopias and dystopias, which are not just about imagining other worlds, but about creating metaphors that explain what is happening in our world that is difficult to see. And this is building on a long tradition of your work. You've done some really great work on the Matrix trilogy, doing the same thing, looking at the way in which accounts of the future can help us understand the present. And so this is a big question, because people would assume video games are often just, all fun and games and first-person shooter and adventures. But you're saying something very, very important about where society is going and what is happening in society. So tell us a little bit about this work.
Yeah, this Bioshock is a game that's almost 2 decades old now, but its message seems to be even more relevant today than it did at the moment of its release. And so it really gave me a great way to talk about some of the stuff that I've been working on, some of the stuff that I've been following, as far as the kind of trajectory that surveillance capitalism and techno-feudalism and that has taken us on. Things which kind of only really blew up a while after the game came out. Um, and the game itself is very, very much um, overtly aimed at being this kind of philosophical exercise where it deliberately takes the ideas of Ayn Rand and her objectivism and the kind of virtues of selfishness, and it builds a game around it. And while Ayn Rand herself might not be taken so seriously as a kind of intellectual, the worrying thing is that the people who do take her seriously are the people in power, the kind of neo-Randians, if you will. Um, and what Bioshock does is it presents us a world um, that has kind of decayed under these philosophies, and draws a parallel between Rand's Atlas Shrugged and the kind of world that she created there, a utopia called Galt's Gulch, where the men of the mind, where all the leading intellectuals of the world had all kind of went into a kind of exile from the masses of the world and kind of built their own utopias where they could free to experiment with from kind of experiments with post-democratic political concepts to actual experiments with biotech and medicine uh, and so what Bioshock does is it creates that same kind of scenario, but it shows that actually it won't lead to this kind of utopic vision. It will lead to a dystopic nightmare. And from the setting to the story to the twist that the game is now so famous for, all of it was used as a way to kind of deconstruct, to challenge the kind of radical selfishness that's espoused in philosophies like objectivism and which we now see in things like the Dark Enlightenment.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to make that link between the current sort of dark enlightenment movement, especially in the kind of tech bro billionaire world, and this long legacy of incredible social influence from Ayn Rand's novels, which are actually kind of crap novels. They're not even enjoyable to read. She's a kind of pretty second-rate writer. But there was something about her work that captured the imagination of a certain class of people, particularly in the United States. That it captured this idea that people who are rich and powerful shouldn't feel bad about that. They shouldn't feel bad about inequality. They should see themselves as heroic, and they should see the kind of deregulation of society, the movement of wealth up to these kind of billionaire classes. I mean, at the time she was writing, there was no such thing as a billionaire. They literally didn't exist. But as a result of her work and an emergent economic philosophy that kind of gelled with that, the critique of the democratic welfare state sort of really took hold and started being replaced by neoliberalism, where this idea of the state existing for the welfare of all its citizens got replaced by the idea of the state is there to support the economy, and by the economy it means rich people's portfolios. And that's really the context of this, and I think understanding the way in which wealth has just been sucked up into these billionaire elites is inseparable from the emergence of these movements like the Dark Enlightenment, which you're going to explain to us. So tell us more about that.
So firstly, yeah, the name, right? The name, even as I try to talk about it in serious academic environments, it always raises eyebrows from people. And I think maybe that was part of the point, that every time you try to discuss it seriously, people are like, is this some kind of, weird conspiracy theory? But yeah, it is a conspiracy. And what the Dark Enlightenment is it takes the ideas of Ayn Rand and it takes the ideas of the Austrian economic thinkers like Ludwig von Mises and his students Maria Rothbard, and it kind of reconciles them. Like, while Rand had her works and her ideas were very, in agreement with the Austrian school of thought initially, where they did start to kind of distance from one another was with the ideas of anarcho-capitalism and the ideas of like Hans Hermann Hoppe, where we're now talking about putting in a return to monarchy. Because what Rand felt, maybe naively, was that you needed some form of the state to be able to defend some form of individual autonomy and individual rights. However, even though she kind of maintained that, what we do see in her works is still this kind of identification with the elites. Even her main character in Atlas Shrugged, her kind of self-insert heroine, Dagny Taggart, is a railroad executive. It's not really the typical underdog story or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so this kind of identification with elites means that when her philosophy tries to extend itself to those beneath the elites, it does so quite clumsily and quite naively, because it discounts structural inequalities. It discounts these kind of impacts of history, of colonialism, of on the kind of future prospects of anyone within these kind of societies that she's imagining.
Yeah.
And so what Bioshock does is it reimagines Galt's Gulch, but says if we have to really follow these ways of thinking, if we have to really embrace these ideas and ideologies, it's not going to go in the way that you think. It's actually going to play out in a way that leads to these kind of darker outcomes. And so to actually talk about it, Bioshock has the city of Rapture, which is a parallel, an analog to Galt's Gulch from Ayn Rand's novels. Rapture is an underwater city where, again, just like with Galt's Gulch, the elites of the world escape to, so that they can practice their crafts and their sciences free from regulation, free from any kind of governmental oversight, free from any taxation. But unlike Galt's Gulch, which turns into a utopia, Bioshock's Rapture becomes very dystopic. The kind of radical selfishness that governs everyone means that everyone eventually starts to just turn on one another. And the kind of promises and the kind of optimism of this unrestrained, unregulated kingdom quickly sees it become a kind of hell.
Yeah. And I think this is really important because this the Randian story, which is like the neoliberal economic story, is that that if people just pursue this kind of individual drive, individual excellence, that it'll somehow create the best overall situation for everyone. But of course, they've done this several times historically, and it's been a catastrophe. And not only that, what's even more important is that this new class of billionaires who have almost unlimited amounts of money to try social experiments and to set up these new worlds are busy trying it all over again. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, that's where this really becomes terrifying. It's the point where the reality starts to outstrip the fiction in terms of how bizarre it can be. Um, so, for instance, like you're describing this class of elite billionaires that are able to throw money at these many projects. So, going back to the late 50s, early 60s, we started to see these seasteads. So quite similar to Bioshock's Rapture, where you have this underwater city, we started seeing from the Republic of Minerva to the Republic of Oceania to more recent ones like the Marinea project to even the Satoshi, which was a crypto ship named after the founder of Bitcoin. Um, and these are just a handful. There
Mm,
is a very, very concrete timeline of these projects and their failures
mm,
that we can go through for each decade from the 50s to the present.
yeah.
Um, Quite worryingly, they begin to shift from these seasteads and enclaves out at sea into other kinds of post-democratic states like charter cities, autonomous nations, and what they are calling the network state.
Mm,
This idea of the idea of autonomous, independent, sovereign states, sorry, that instead of being run by a democratically elected leader, are run by kind of CEO kings that will run a state similar to a Silicon Valley startup.
mm,
And the investment in AI, the investment in crypto, and developing these kind of crypto jurisdictions are all post-democratic strategies and post-democratic technologies that allows them to kind of bypass the institutions that currently hold liberal democracy together from global financial institutions um, to just, the typical means of governmental regulation of international bodies that collectively determine how certain technologies, how certain medical practices are to be approached and handled.
yeah.
So
And
what
in
these
many ways, this is like an end point of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism was always like, trying to move away from like the welfare state where the state organized all these public resources, education, health, and say, no, 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 things must be run as businesses. We must strip down the state. We must get rid of the big state, the nanny state, and things that were businesses work much better. So we must replace our notion of big government, welfare state with the idea of businesses. And this is just the next point in that argument of saying, well, let's just not have things like elected government. Let's just have the actual state being run as a business by a CEO. And this is where I think there's a kind of a radicalism that is deeply shocking with the Dark Enlightenment movement and with with the Elon Musks and Peter Thiels, is that they are literally making the argument that the historical era of of human rights, of democracy, of the welfare state, that era should be over now. And not only should it be over, that it was a mistake, and that they now actively want to dismantle it and replace it with this new thing in which democracy, welfare, those human rights, those things are just no longer relevant, because other kinds of goals, which are goals that seem very intelligible to billionaires but don't seem very intelligible to actual humans like us. But they seem to be getting the capability to do that because they've accumulated such staggering amounts of wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. For them, human rights, democracy, these concepts are now inconveniences. And these are things that are actually holding progress back. Um, and what we see in the Dark Enlightenment, in their marriage of these Randian thought with the Austrian economic thought, was that they kind of resolved Rand's contradictions, in that she created a philosophy for elites, even though she kind of naively tried to extend it to those below her. What they've done is said it is a philosophy for elites. It's a philosophy kind of even by them, for them. And what they see as the solution to the problems facing democracy is not more freedom, but less freedom. And that is where the kind of most frightening elements of these philosophies
Yeah,
start to take root. And we hear it all the time. We heard it from Peter Thiel saying that um, freedom and democracy are incompatible.
yeah,
We've heard it from Yarvin, who has said that people need to get over their fear of dictators, and that we need to return to these kind of monarchies. Um, the problem is, when they are considering these things, they are not considering the kind of damage that is done along the way. And this has very much been the kind of Silicon Valley ideology: move fast and break things. That
yeah,
we have these ideas, we have these ambitions, and we can rush to put them in place. And if, a genocide or two happen along the way, it's,
yeah.
like from the Rohingya to now to Gaza,
Because the things
all
that
of these
get
things.
broken are people. I mean, ordinary people are the expendable resources. And I think it's worth stopping and talking about that, because we talk about like the Dark Enlightenment, whatever. So, and it sounds like this is some like dark corner of like 8chan or somewhere, where there's a bunch of like totally like zoned out dudes getting into some hardcore conspiracy theorizing, but it's not that. I mean, these are people who are at the very center of global capital at the moment. These are some of the most the biggest companies. They directly connected in with the Trump political administration, and they saying out loud what their vision of utopia is, which is a vision that for everyone else is dystopic. I mean, this is really interesting. And that even taking things that, like Palantir, the metaphor from Lord of the Rings, that is a negative thing in Lord of the Rings, but for them, it's like, no, this is cool. We want totalitarian control, and these are people who are normalized. These are the Elon Musks. Um, so tell us a little bit, like, who is the Dark Enlightenment? What's the story about the PayPal mafia? What's the relation between PayPal mafia and like South Africa?
So the Dark Enlightenment, it really kind of started with Curtis Yarvin, and he was a blogger writing in the early days of the internet, the proto-internet, back when the internet was, ARPANET and DARPANET, and before it had opened itself and up to the rest of the world. So he was a figure from those very, very early days. And he had this blog called Unqualified Reservations, which he wrote under a pseudonym, Mencius Moldbug. And in the beginning, I think writing under the pseudonym, he got to kind of express some very dark things, things that, today people are expressing those things kind of openly, but at least back then it was still something that was kept a bit hush, a bit under wraps, to the point where it became this kind of, in the early days of Silicon Valley, like, are you reading Molebug? Was like a thing that would get whispered between people, or maybe you said something that reflected, oh, you reading Molebug, it was this hushed thing, and we saw through unqualified reservations, through his early writings, Yarvin become the figure to introduce the idea of the red pill from the Matrix films to the online right. We also saw, as far as South Africa and that goes, we saw him writing in praise of South Africa, of Rhodesia, of he even wrote a eulogy for Ian Smith in which he saw him as one of the last figures who was willing to marry the kind of rhetoric of supremacy with the violence needed to carry it out.
Yeah, so I mean, it's literally a justification of white supremacy and colonial violence. They're literally saying that those are not metaphors for them. That is aspirational for them.
And I think it's worth actually talking about the kind of range of his ideas, so that once we then talk about who he's influencing and where these ideas have landed, it will hopefully ring some more alarm bells. For instance, after the mass killings by Anders Breivik in Norway, he detonated a bomb in the city, and then he went out to Camp Utoya to conduct his spree killing. In the immediate aftermath of that, Yarvin, writing as Molebug, not only praised him, but said, offered him a bit of praise and critique, actually. The praise he offered was that at least the killer knew not to actually go out and kill Muslims, that in order to stop Islamic immigration, you need to actually kill the kind of leftist liberals who are bringing in migrants into...
Yeah, the people who believe in multiculturalism.
2011.
But I mean, this is incredible. This is after the worst mass killing in Europe since, I guess since the Bosnian genocide. And I mean, this is a catastrophe. I mean, and he's saying, "Oh no, this is awesome!" Like that he's praising mass murder as a strategy for moving away from kind of traditional democracy, human rights to this new form of society. But this is not some like neo-Nazi, hiding in some corner of 8chan. This is a guy who is, as you were saying, he is being widely read by the venture capitalists, the billionaire tech bros. I mean, he is their philosopher in the way that Ayn Rand was the philosopher of this like 80s conservative economics, like Thatcherism, Reaganism, that have done this catastrophic damage to the sort of Western welfare states.
Yeah, absolutely. Yarvin has become that figure, along with his kind of co-conspirator Nick Land. The two of them have given birth to the Dark Enlightenment and to this idea of neo-reactionary accelerationism. And that is a really scary part. This, what it means to be an accelerationist, but in the halls of power. So accelerationism is this idea that democracy is doomed. However, if we just let it run its course and eventually get to that moment of ultimate doom, we may lose a lot more along the way. So it is preferable to accelerate collapse immediately so that we can have this moment where we switch over from democracy to network state or to these ideas of CEO kings and supremacy that they have.
Yeah.
Which is why the investment and the scaling of these post-democratic technologies from AI to crypto is so threatening because of the instability that they create and
Yeah.
because depending on them in the kind of techno-feudalist way that writers like and economists like Yanis Varoufakis warn us about, um, is that we are creating the conditions for collapse. And it's scary when you think that the people with their hands on the end the world button are people who actually think that ending the world is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is what is just staggering about it, because when they talk about society collapsing precisely because they believe they exist above society. They have got so much wealth, they've got such unlimited resources that they'll be able to sort of watch this collapse of society from their balconies. And it reminds me a lot of, I don't know if you've read many of the J.G. Ballard novels, but he kind of writes this about the way in which, like, society starts just collapsing from the inside in certain ways, and that are very, they he gets the relation between the normal and the horrific in a really interesting way. But this billionaire class, which is a historical new thing. I mean, there was not a billionaire class before, and they came out of the sort of Randian neoliberal dismantling of the welfare state, and now they've become an autonomous power that can that literally wants to destroy what we think of as society and replace it with something that serves them rather than that serves the human race. So bring it back to Bioshock. Are there lessons? Does Bioshock give us hope at all, or does it just paint this bleak future for us to get depressed about?
Um, yeah, so the cool thing with BioShock is that while it does continue painting this very depressing idea, um, it actually puts you in the driver's chair, the seat, um, in that as a piece of video game media, it is way more agentic, it is way more, it immerses you, it gives you opportunities to make decisions uh, and and in BioShock, the game, like a lot of these things we've been discussing now about this kind of lack of empathy, about this kind of the virtues of selfishness, the game offers you these choices.
Hmm.
So throughout the game, um, so in the game, there's these substances that characters take, and it gives them different abilities and powers, and the idea was that in when Rapture was developed, that this was going to be one of these technologies that makes Rapture a utopia,
Hmm.
that people can experiment and people can do this biomedical,
Yeah.
experimentation and develop these kind of new abilities. However, it quickly leads into addiction, evolving abilities actually becomes mutating into monstrosities. Um, and throughout the game, the player is given these moments where they encounter these little girls. These little girls they call the little sisters, and the player can either kill these sisters and harvest them to strengthen the player's abilities and that the player develops through the game, or the player can choose to remain disempowered and not kill these little children.
Hmm.
Uh, but there's no kind of overt reward for that.
Hmm.
It's just a sense of you as an individual feeling I didn't feel nice doing that,
Yeah.
or maybe I didn't care.
Yeah.
Maybe I just wanted to see my character get empowered, and maybe I just wanted to
Yeah.
be stronger and be um, and so the player is constantly put in these moments,
Yeah.
and the game even gives you legitimations for killing these children. It says that, oh, these are the products of X, Y, all these experiments. They aren't actually real children anymore. So you
Yeah.
shouldn't feel too bad if you decide to harvest them.
Yeah.
And I think that actually makes the choice a lot more interesting to
Yeah.
see that, oh, do you decide I'm just going to be pragmatic now and I'm just going to be practical now? And I'm not really going to think of it as an act of violence or as an act
Yeah.
of killing. I'm going to think of it as,
And it seems that that sort of
um,
kind of creates a really sort of challenging moment because on the one hand, it's affirming the Dark Enlightenment philosophy, saying, "Yeah, just kill them. It's okay. We're gonna achieve these good goals." But on the other hand, it's foregrounding what these what this Dark Enlightenment philosophy tries to conceal is the incredible violence against vulnerable people that has to be exercised to move towards these whether you think of them as utopic or dystopic end games. And I mean, one of the things for me is that in the moment of the escalation of AI, it seems that's exactly the choice we're being offered. It's like, oh, AI will just help you, get your startup going and code your new app, and it's going to be so cool. It's going to create this utopic society. But actually, what AI is definitely going to do is just annihilate what we think of as employment. It's just going to create this sort of mass immiseration and unemployment. But it's also going to literally destroy the environment, like the ecosystem that is necessary for human life. So in a way, we are playing a Bioshock game now with AI, and that different people are having different and complex relationships to it.
yeah, absolutely. On the one hand, with the environmental side of it, is that this freshwater evaporative cooling is currently the only way that the data servers are maintained. And that means that we are losing loads of fresh water every day just maintaining these servers. On the other hand, the kind of warring threat of the post-democratic escalations we are seeing already take hold with places like El Salvador, Argentina, even in some cases Singapore, where uh, the kind of regulations against AI have been completely lifted. In fact, in places like Argentina, regulating against AI, could potentially be seen as a crime almost.
Yeah,
Um, and they are developing these kind of legal language to form non-human corporations. El Salvador has kind of called itself the Bitcoin nation and has opened itself up to, um, you know, foreign money coming in to facilitate more post-democratic experimentations. But yeah, now that we're seeing the rubber hit the road, these things are not just the stuff of nightmares. They're the stuff of the daily news cycle now.
yeah,
And and the problem is they're getting very normalized. And the
yeah,
problem is that they are now everywhere. And the more we start to depend on these things, the more we are sliding into a kind of rapture, Bioshock-like dynamic where
yeah,
these things promise us convenience, they get us addicted, and then they degrade. Just like with enshittification and with the idea that in order for these things to be profitable and to keep on going, they need to first addict us, they need to hold us captive, and then degrade the services that they offer us. I mean, we've seen over the years social networks quickly transform from being social networks into just media,
mm,
into just media that is constantly vomited out repeatedly. We are now even seeing instances where the kind of networking being done on these things is relatively minimal, and it's just a way for misinformation and propaganda to be shoved down our throats.
mm,
Um, and that is uh, where the kind of accelerationist cause becomes more alarming. In
yeah,
that, if these technologies that once promised us the world are going to devolve into these hellish nightmares, it does push us to collapse. We've already seen, in South Africa, for example, we've seen misinformation and disinformation go from state capture and the kind of spin doctoring around Zuma into later causing the riots and the looting in 2021, where we saw so many of the drivers of that misinformation being original accounts that were part of the 2016 misinformation
Yeah.
campaign, which Twitter had committed to purge, but which was somehow still around.
Yeah. And which are
So
now
if
being
you
used to incite mass xenophobic violence.
exactly, and we are gonna see these trends only continue. Um, we're gonna see more and more and more of it in the time to come.
So
Um,
it raises a question, what is to be done? I mean, this is the problem, is having this kind of analytic that is so horrifying, that where reality starts clearly having this dystopic trajectory and having and that trajectory being driven by very, very powerful forces. What are we supposed to do?
that is the the trick question, right? Um, Look, the easy thing to say is that these things are powered by surveillance and extraction, and so that the less we give them, the less they're able to extract, and the less they're able to develop their simulations and their algorithms. And there's a few problems with that. The one is you, as a lone individual, doing it against the masses that are still feeding it. How much of a difference can one person make is the one problem. But the other problem is what happens if we do feed it all this distorted data and it does still go on to dominate the world, but now it goes on to dominate the world with distorted data?
Yeah.
And
Uh,
that can produce negative consequences of its
mm,
own. So it is really a mess we find
mm,
ourselves in,
mm,
especially being that these are the technologies pushed out there by the elite billionaire class. So in every space we go into, we find that everyone will be telling us that, you know what, the cat's out the bag now, it's too late, AI is the future, we have to just, you know, get along with it.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think we may be all needing to have our own kind of personal resistance, personal
Yeah.
revolutions towards our relationships with our devices, our relationships with convenience, our
Yeah.
relationships with the truth. Um, and I think a big thing is not only revealing the kind of darker machinations and intentions that are behind all of this, but also revealing the human cost
Mm,
of these conveniences. Are you going to be so okay using these technologies knowing that some little girl was harvested so that you could have it? And
yeah.
I mean, as terrifying as that sounds, that is the reality. We
Yeah.
have seen with
Yeah.
like Anthony Lowenstein's Palestine Laboratory,
Yeah.
and we have seen with like this Yanis Varoufakis interviews with Palantir officials, um, that people fleeing bombing in Gaza is being used as a kind of source of data for urban management and traffic simulations.
Yeah.
So even in these kind of banal, everyday things, there is a very terrifying human cost that if it were put to the everyday individual, they might not be okay with it. They might not be okay still continuing what they're doing or using
Yeah.
what they're using, knowing the what goes into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So on the one hand, we've got this kind of the absolute necessity of breaking the capitalist realism, to use Mark Fisher's term, to the normalization of these systems of inequality, of these new emergent forms of exploitation, these new forms of destructiveness that are trying to replace democracy, human rights, those kinds of things. Um, on the other hand, in the back of my mind is the Unabomber. um, the guy who back in the sort of 1970s already kind of like got a dystopic read on that stage of capitalism, and sort of built his shack out in the forest, and then started bombing, like, tech companies and planes and things. And we don't want to end up there. We don't want to end up with a neo-Unabomber movement, for sure. But we also, as you say, we don't want to be, killing the little girls. And, when you talk about that, it's so like that this story has been told, this Bioshock story has been told before by Ursula Le Guin in The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And really, that already had created this ethics for us. Like, what do we do if we are participating in a society that we know has got certain unacceptable human costs? And so we've got a choice between not knowing that, like erasing that knowledge from ourselves, or embracing it, that's the Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and saying, well, we're going to be the like Übermenschen, we're going to be the overlords of the new techno-feudal system. And so we feel cool about that because we better human beings. That's why we became billionaires. Or we have a kind of a human relation to it and say, well, shit is fucked, and we're going to have to work out a new way of thinking about this.
Yeah, there was also a book, I think 2005 roughly, Paulina Borsuk, it was called, pronouncing her name right, it was called Cyber Selfish. And it kind of predicted all of this. It kind of looked at the kind of Randian ideologies pervading Silicon Valley. And this book was an early warning, but it didn't really get the attention that it needed back then. Right now, however, it seems like a very prophetic work.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
she's been doing interviews and a lot of appearances now.
yeah. And this
But yeah,
is
maybe.
actually a feature of the present. Is a lot of science fiction from 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s that was seen as being kind of a bit far out and radical, whether it's Handmaid's Tale or whatever, is now seen as being like, oh yeah, called it. There seems to be a kind of a growing realization that things are more precipitous now than that they used to be. So, any last point you want to wrap up with before we end today?
Just a few weeks ago, maybe about a month back now, actually, these hacktivists hacked Peter Thiel's invite-only secret social network for the billionaire elites. And it kind of revealed that the fears that we've been having about this thing are not only very real, but the fears that we are having are actually kind of late. And what we've seen from the leaks that came out was that these are figures from around the world, figures that you would have thought would have conflicts of interest in place,
Yeah,
uh, but also to see kind of how casually the end of the world is being spoken about. Um, and I think that not only should the revelations be alarming, but the way it was revealed should also be alarming.
yeah,
That it turns out this secret social network of the world's billionaires, it was not actually that secure. And it was the fact that like these hackers made comments about how easy it was for them to get in. And I think that alone is terrifying.
yeah,
That these are the people that we are surrendering both private and public trust to their power, to their technologies, to their wealth. And it's not seeming to be the kind of advanced tech that our sci-fi tells us of.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that's the scary part. It means that not only are we surrendering public trust to something that's not safe, but it also means that the the kind of end of the world plans are being doodled. They're being
yeah,
drawn in crayon. They're being
yeah,
um, And the risk is that we don't end up taking it as seriously as we should.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe that's then the end point, is to say that our project of the present is to talk about the end of the world in a little bit of a more serious way.
Mhm. And yeah, names like the Dark Enlightenment don't help us. Uh,
Yeah.